Hey guys, Janine here with your final Elm Street review. I have had an absolute blast kind of just going through this franchise and checking out all these movies. Of course, some of them were not great, but in general, I had fun just kind of delving into a new horror franchise for me. I had really only seen the first movie and that was it. Didn't really see any of the other sequels. So it was really great kind of getting to delve into this franchise, particularly because, as I've talked about in other reviews, this was the first horror movie I really saw and it absolutely scared me. I saw it at 8 years old, trying to stay up late with my sister and her friend who were watching it for a slumber party, and it terrified me. I had nightmares and I could not eat pizza for months because it reminded me of Freddy's face. So just kind of fun that this was the franchise our It's a Wonderful podcast patrons voted for me to check out this spooky season, and I've had fun kind of watching these movies and reviewing them, some of these movies watching them for the first time. Sorry, my outfit is not really appropriate to these films. This is covering another horror franchise that I actually do have some gaps in as well, I'm sorry to say. So hopefully I will get to delve into the Child's Play films next spooky season. But this was my Halloween costume. I've come from a Halloween party, so I thought it would be fun to still stay in costume for this review. So not a Freddy costume, a Chucky costume, but it's Halloween, it's spooky season, this is the last review, so gotta be dressed up and cute for this. So I'm not really gonna be doing any single reviews for Freddy vs. Jason or the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, but I will touch upon them here in this review. I just wanted to kind of focus this series of reviews on these 7 films that had kind of a connected continuity. Those other 2 films are kind of outliers, even though they do have the Freddy character. So I will touch upon them here in this review. But this is mostly a New Nightmare focused review because I was so excited to watch this movie, Wes Craven back in the franchise. I heard that it was super meta, Heather Langenkamp playing herself, and kind of reading kind of what the story was about. I was really into kind of watching this movie for the first time. So this was the one I was most excited to see. So I'm excited to talk about my thoughts on it. But first, let's touch upon the 2 outlier films before I get into that. So first off with Freddy vs. Jason. This movie was kind of a total mess. You know, special effects did not look great, but it had some really solid elements. I mean, the title is Freddy vs. Jason, and those elements with the 2 of them and the big kind of fight with them, I think was definitely did that title justice. This was a kind of rivalry that was in the making when it was teased in an earlier Friday the 13th movie years ago, and so finally kind of getting this movie I think was a very special thing, particularly for horror fans. So, you know, they really paid off the battle between these 2, and the fights between them I think were really well done. Had some really interesting ideas and interesting elements. I think it was kind of a smart story element for them to kind of have the idea that the Springwood kids don't really remember Freddy because these are different kids from the original kids, and so he needs to bring Jason in to kill the kids and remind them of Freddy's presence so that he can actually get into their dreams and kill them, because he is pretty much powerless if nobody remembers him. So I liked that story element, but you had some really ridiculous things in here. The Jay from the You Askew universe of films kind of wannabe character was ridiculous. This kind of thing of making Jason afraid of water, like that was not really, even though he was drowned, like I get kind of the idea they were going with, but that was never really an established thing that Jason was actually like afraid of water to where, you know, he wouldn't go near it, because we've seen him go near water, in water, for several films. So just kind of trying to use that as a thing was a little bit silly. The CGI, like I said, was not great. But overall, I think it was good in the fact that it paid off the Freddy vs. Jason aspects of the film, and that made it really fun. Some of the kills were a little bit ridiculous, and some kind of weird editing, and kind of the slow-mo kind of jittery thing that they were doing in the film was a little silly. The 2 characters, the 2 of them that were in the facility that is actually the same facility from Dream Warriors, I actually liked them and kind of their story story and their dynamic together was kind of fun. But the rest of the characters were very bland and boring. Monica Keena, like, I'm a huge fan of hers just from Dawson's Creek. Her character Abby Morgan was a great character. She was such a bitch in that show, so I know her to really have some great range. So to see her here just be kind of this bland character was just not very fun. So yeah, like, the group of kids we're following, they're not very likable, they're not very interesting. So that is kind of a trend that happened in the later Nightmare films. So it's sticking to that trend, but definitely didn't care about any of these characters. So yes, there were some fun, overall there were some fun story elements in Freddy vs. Jason. They did really pay off the battle between those two, and I think that's the most important thing. So overall, just kind of a fun, silly watch in general for Freddy vs. Jason. Not perfect, definitely a lot of kind of not great things in this movie, but in paying off the title, in paying off these two juggernauts kind of coming together, some interesting story things peppered in, but some very uninteresting characters. So overall, kind of a fun watch. I would definitely watch this over A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 and 6. So that is Freddy vs. Jason. Then to get into a little bit of the remake, with Jackie Earle Haley. Just not a fan of this film. It basically was a carbon copy of the original film, but just very bland. Again, a bunch of characters we just don't care about, kind of recreations of scenes that weren't really kind of innovative or changing anything or doing anything interesting. When you're doing things that are exactly the same as the original, but you're not innovating or doing anything different with them, it makes your movie feel pointless. Like, it didn't even need to exist, because you're not doing anything interesting. You're just doing the same thing that we've already seen in not even a better way than it was done before. So definitely just a lot of kind of regurgitated things that weren't really interesting. Not any interesting things happening with the story, not great effects. The kind of added thing of making Freddy even worse than just a child killer, like just adding that extra thing to Freddy, making him do other things to children aside from just killing them, was just kind of a gross thing that was never established in the other films. So yeah, just not a fan of this remake, just very kind of lackluster. Not interesting. It didn't really need to exist because they did not innovate on anything. Rooney Mara is a great actress, but she was just so bland in this film after having Heather Langenkamp. You're trying to play that character and she's just doing it so bland. She's sleepwalking through this whole movie. Pun kind of intended. So yeah, just not a great remake, just didn't really need to exist. Jackie Earle Haley, it is, like, I think he was a solid pick to replace Robert Englund, but overall, just not a fun movie to watch, not an innovative remake, just felt very unnecessary because they didn't really do anything new with, they just regurgitated things we've already seen in a very bland way. Very bland performances, very bland characters that we just did not care about. So yeah, not a huge fan of the remake. So now we get into A New Nightmare, this movie I was really excited to get into after those two terrible movies with Dream Child and Freddy's Dead. So I was really excited to get back into this. Wes has returned to the franchise, meta, 2 years before Scream, so he was definitely kind of in the zone of the meta kind of commentary. So really loved this kind of concept of the story. Heather Langenkamp coming back, playing this kind of exaggerated version of herself. I liked the story of, it opened with somebody making finger knives like the original film. The callbacks worked really well. I think, we saw the Elm Street house again, but it worked because Nancy is here and Nancy lived in the Elm Street house. So this was the one time where a callback to the Elm Street house actually made some sense. But yeah, really loved Heather Langenkamp's performance here. Like the story that, she has this son and this Freddy entity is trying to come back through you know, this idea of the movies, and Wes's script and these dreams he's having is, you know, him dying in the movies was holding him back. And so now, you know, having this new movie be created is a way for him to come into the real world and continue his whole thing. And Nancy's the only one who can stop him, because Heather Langenkamp's performance gave Nancy the strength and power to defeat him. And she gave, you know, her acting gave Nancy that power, so she needs to be the one to defeat Freddy. So I loved kind of this whole kind of inside idea, and we're seeing Robert Englund as Robert Englund and Wes Craven as Wes Craven. Little cameos from other actors from the early Elm Street films. So I really liked kind of the meta-ness of this. I liked the story that they crafted. Heather Langenkamp is great. And John, I liked her little friendship with John Saxon too. Like, I'd love to believe that they were really kind of close like that she could call him and talk to him like that. I loved her scenes with him and seeing John Saxon kind of be this friend, father figure to her. I thought that was really sweet. The kills were really great. I like the callback kill of the babysitter. This is an example of a kill that we've seen before, dragging her all around the walls and killing her against the walls of the ceiling, but we're actually seeing Freddy like drag her around. So we're seeing that kill, but seeing Freddy actually interacting with her while he's dragging her around, which is not what we saw. We just saw the girl get dragged around in the first film, and it just looked like, you know, she was just floating around and getting killed by this invisible thing. But to see kind of scenes of Freddy actually dragging her and pulling her in and slicing at her while she's being dragged up all the wall and ceiling was definitely a cool, innovative way to give us a callback, but doing something interesting with it, which is, I think, what you need to do. So some really fun callbacks. Again, Heather Langenkamp giving a great performance, really great story. His name's Miko Hughes, the little kid who I think everyone knows from like Kindergarten Cop and Full House and Pet Sematary, which is kind of a funny thing because I think Heather Langenkamp is actually married to the effects person who was on Pet Sematary. So I think I saw an interview where James A. Janice was talking to her and her husband, and they were like, so was Miko Hughes kind of the reason you guys got together? Because obviously he worked with Miko Hughes in Pet Sematary, and now he played her son in this later movie. But they said no, so it was just kind of funny that they had that connection with this kid. But yeah, kind of having the story of Freddy kind of trying to get through her kid to get to her. I really liked kind of how they crafted this story, and again, seeing these kind of real life versions of these characters, but this exaggerated thing. And the build of it, I think, was really well done. Just little kind of hints to building to where the story was going. Heather kind of living her life and then starting to have these nightmares and starting to see Freddy and trying to have these conversations with these real life actors in her life, and them kind of not believing her, but also kind of understanding a little bit because they are from this movie world of where Freddy exists. So I liked kind of her trying to figure this out and the build of it and what's really going on. And then she has this conversation with Wes, and he's kind of telling her what's really happening. So I really was a fan of this story, how it was crafted, how it was this kind of inside look of this actual person, but kind of this exaggerated version of them. And her kind of talking to everybody and trying to figure out piece by piece and trying to protect her son and nobody really believing her. Just kind of a lot of fun. I thought the kills were really cool. The upgrade of Freddy, I liked Freddy being scary again. That was a kind of a big thing because he had kind of been this caricature goofy thing for these last few films, and so to see him kind of be this dark scary personality again definitely took us back to the first film. Even his look was scarier and meaner. He wasn't as quippy. He was just very kind of mean and demonic and looked more like a creature, like a monster, than a kind of burnt man. So I liked kind of the more muscle kind of texture that we were seeing. The finger glove has kind of like I think a knife on the thumb, which it didn't usually have. And Freddy just seemed more scary and menacing, which I think was a great kind of touch, because, and you kind of want to separate it because it's not actually Freddy, it's like this Freddy entity trying to come into the real world. So I like that they upgraded it and brought Freddy back to this scary thing, because I think I heard that Wes actually watched all of the movies that he had no part in after the first Elm Street film, and so I think he probably took some of that, seeing that goofy kind of version of Freddy quipping and being silly, and really wanted to bring it back to him being scary. And I think he did that really well, because Freddy was very menacing and scary. You know, he has a trench coat now, and he was very kind of intense, and like, even like I said, with the makeup, he looked more like a monster, like a demon, than a burnt man. So I liked that Freddy was scary again in this movie. And like I said, Heather Langenkamp being this strong, badass character. Not afraid to kind of get in there and fight Freddy. And just like the callbacks again were really fun, like the phone with the tongue thing, and some of the kills and stuff like that. So just really had a lot of fun with this movie. I was so excited to watch it, and it did not disappoint. It was kind of a great final film to round out kind of the last two films that really kind of set this decline for the franchise. Just Wes coming back to the thing he created, because Wes is so great. Like, he defined several different decades of horror. He did things in the 70s, the 80s with these Elm Street films, and then kind of going into the 90s with Scream. So just love that he was back, and he kind of saw all the things that were happening in the other films and tried to kind of do his own thing while kind of still, you know, building off of what he originally did in the first film, making things more interesting, throwing some really interesting ideas out there, and most of them I think paid off. There's not a lot I didn't like about this movie. I actually had a lot of fun with it, and yeah, I'm glad. I think there was a reason why I was so excited to watch this one, and it did not disappoint. Just, I can't speak enough about how great Heather Langenkamp was in this film, and just Wes in general, always kind of really writing these strong female characters, and yeah, had a lot of fun with this franchise, and have had a blast watching all of these films. So really enjoyed A New Nightmare. Thank you to our It's a Wonderful podcast patrons for voting for me to watch this franchise of films. I've had the best time kind of delving into it, and talking my thoughts on all of these movies, particularly since this was kind of the first film, was the movie that really was my bridge into horror, that kind of scared me but fascinated me at the same time. So to kind of go back to it and cover now the whole series after kind of this was the first movie that really scared me, the first horror movie that I really watched, is kind of a special thing. So I think it was meant to be that you guys voted on this franchise of films. I had a blast doing it because I love spooky season, so this was a great one to cover all spooky season long. Hopefully I'll get to cover another horror franchise, probably Child's Play, next spooky season. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching these reviews, checking them out, and yeah, it's been great. And happy Halloween, happy spooky season, guys. Of course, this isn't the only thing you can find on this channel. I do reviews on other things. We do our Monday Madness show, a really fun show where it's just chill, kick back, me and Morgan talking about movie news, talking fun topics, and then playing some fun games. So it's a really chill kickback show that we have on this channel. It's also on the podcast feed. And Morgan does some really great Blu-ray collection videos. He is all about physical media, so when he gets a new haul of films, he'll kind of go through and talk about what he's gotten. He's had some great horror movies that he's gotten this spooky season, so you can check those videos out. And I doing reviews of kind of everything. So please check those out here on the channel. Like, share, subscribe, do all of the things. Of course, I mentioned the It's a Wonderful podcast feed. We have the Monday Madness show there. We have Morgan Hasn't Seen every Wednesday. We're going to be talking Spielberg films all November that Morgan hasn't seen. And the It's a Wonderful podcast show, our classic films podcast. So we talk all the kind of older movies that people just don't really seem to give too much love to. So we give love to classic films over there. So please check out the It's a Wonderful podcast feed as well. Again, like, share, and subscribe this video, do all these things to the It's a Wonderful podcast channel and podcast feed. Become a patron. It's a Wonderful podcast on patreon.com. We have some really fun tiers. You can vote and help me pick another fun franchise to watch next spooky season. So yeah, thank you guys so much. You can find the show on Twitter at It's a Wonderful One. You can find me on Twitter at Janine Debeen _. Find me on Instagram and TikTok at Janine Debeen. And again, thank you guys so much. This was such a fun spooky season covering these films. I can't thank you enough for checking out this video. And, you know, I'll have other reviews for other things coming up, and I might do another poll for another franchise to get into. So stay tuned for that. And this was so much fun. Happy Halloween, guys. Bye.